our very finest Chardonnay-based brut style that we produce each year. So when we think about the Schramsberg, brut sparkling wine, kind of set, if you will, we make some from Chardonnay, the Blanc de Blanc style. J. Schram would be in that set. Sometimes we do vineyard designate sparkling wines that are also Chardonnay-based. The Tognetti was recently done. We've done Schwarz not so long ago. There was a Green Valley, etc. We also do Blanc Noir styles, Pinot Noir-based styles. The Reserve, kind of the captain of that style, and then we have the Redding Ranch would be an example of another noir style that we do, right? That is just come out. The Sonoma Coast and Anderson Valley brutes that we've done, I believe, also been Pinot heavy. So we kind of think of them as another kind of brut that you can make, but we're focused on Pinot Noir there. And then, of course, we've had some great success with rosés. And so I often like to get people who enjoy Schramsberg sparkling wines. They often will ask us about that house style. And it is a little hard to capture in a box because we really do make a deep range. And Chardonnays are indeed different from Pinot Noirs, and then rosés are different from both these other types. But they're all dry sparkling wines and can be absolutely delicious.
What seems to be absent in this particular blend is the Marin in there, but you can see we're predominantly in Sonoma. The Sonoma Chardonnay, Sonoma Pinot Noir is really becoming more present as we start to get towards the 2010 or so, and we'll see that in more of our wines, and you'll see that also in what we choose to do for our vineyard designates going forward. This year we're looking to do, as you mentioned, potentially a Dutton Ranches, which would be Chardonnay based, and then doing Juster, which Juster will be featured again for the second time. But here on the property we had some great fruit. I think we had 115 tons. It was a high water mark for us here for the J. Davies estate.
In that 2009 vintage.
Yeah, 2009 vintage. So a high mark for us. The low has really been like 2015 where we had 56 tons. So you can see there's this great range. But you can see this wine really has great amount of depth. It was quite rich in there. We've actually liked this wine so much, we're actually going to set aside a portion of this for an LD for later on. I think we have enough. We may have enough for the Cellar Club, but we definitely may have enough for the Riddler Circle. And we're also looking to do, if we mentioned that we're going to be doing 2 LDs coming out for this holiday season. One will be the 2001 Reserve, and the other is going to be the 2000 J. Schram. And those are going to be disgorging here in middle to end of March. And I believe we're releasing those in September, October. For those.
Maybe a kiss closer to the holidays. They'll be pretty limited in terms of the quantities. I believe we're between the two of them 300 cases or something like that.
And that's going to include magnums and 3 liters again. So
a little bit on those.
A little bit of each one of those things. But we've laid down the trial. It's going to be a very beautiful wine for us to be showcasing again. We're looking to try and set aside more of these LDs as we go forward. They seem to really showcase how well sparkling wine can age in the caves. I think this will be.
And not just sparkling wine, but Schramsberg.
Sorry, Schramsberg. Sorry. Yes, we're doing a 97 reserve for the Premier Napa Valley this year. So anyone's doing math, it's a good 20 years in the caves. And that'll be limited release, 60 bottles. We'll be pouring that at three or four different events.
Wine, as we look at it now, I think the vibrancy, the youthful vitality of it is probably noteworthy. As we might compare this to the 2008, which is probably more opulent at this stage, showing a little bit more of the toasted vanilla and the power that comes with some age. In some ways, we're really pleased with where this wine is actually right now, giving us a sense for a long future. This is probably as bright and vibrant of a 9-year-old, sparkling wine as we've ever presented to the marketplace. And so that's exciting. Underneath that are some serious layers and characters that will evolve over the course of time. So we're excited. Each vintage is different. We're working with, I think as everybody knows, a really broad array of sites on purpose. We want to make an even broader array of base wines with which we can blend. Some of those vineyards or portions of those vineyards will be picked at very low sugar levels. Some will be picked at slightly higher sugar levels. Everything kind of averaging around 19, but we really have developed a much broader spectrum of components than ever before. And we follow our nose. At the end of the day, if the blend works out to be a little bit more with some of those Sebastopol Occidental sites than the Carneros sites, so be it. We're not beholden to work with any specific vineyards, and they all have a chance to play a role. With that said, I'm sure there's a barrel or two of Tognetti and a Hyde in this blend, but they're not the predominant vineyards that are in the blend, if that makes sense.
Like we did a 2009 Tognetti bottling.
Correct, did 2009 Tognetti bottling.
Got it over there.
So we stole some of it and put it over there too.
Yes.
But before we do that, the decision as to what's going to be in the Appellation blend, we take what we think is our best shot and do the J. Schram tier.
There seemed to be a trend toward less barrel fermentation. Historically, J. Schram had been about 40% barrel fermented. The 08 was 35, here was 27. Can you talk about this trend?
It's not actually a trend.
Okay.
In 2016, it was a 50% barrel fermentation for the J. Schram Rosé. It depends on how the barrels turn out for us each year. So how that barrel blend matches, because if we do too much barrel, then it becomes too creamy in texture and starts to shade over all the acidity that we're looking for. So we need to have that balance between the two. It's always looking for that center of balance. In this case, 27% worked much better. In the barrels we were probably, I think in this one, we probably used less ML barrels, and we used more of a BL barrel. And it just seemed to be, integrate much better. This year, an example, we're really looking at potentially in that between 30 and 40% for J. Schram this year. 20% is too lean, 50% is too much. So we're trying to find that, and we'll be looking at that today.
So would you say that there's a correlation toward when it's a riper vintage using less barrel fermentation and when it's a cooler vintage using more?
Well, if that was true, then we would be using the 09 with more barrel fermentation versus 04, which 04, I mean, if we do 04, probably in 12, there really is, it's hard to make a correlation between those
I think
things.
that the student of wine, the sommelier, will often try to decipher a code.
Sure.
I think, and that's fine. And there may be some producers that in fact employ a code. At Schramsberg, I think our approach has been to let's make a broad array of wines, let's carefully taste through them, and then craft the blend. We do all our tastings blind, so there's not like, oh, I think this year let's just try fewer barrels and let's go in that direction. If we feel like it tastes better that way on the day that at some point we just have to pull the trigger. And so we're, our approach, I don't want to say that's scientific, but we go with our taste, and to some degree we go to their taste on that day and that moment, and bam, we have got to pull the trigger and move on. But there's not preceding that tasting, some sort of extra thinking that goes into, this was a later year and maybe the acidity is a little bit higher, so we should definitely increase the amount of barrels and assume that will somehow work better. But that doesn't mean that people may not talk about it like that,
It'd be nice it'd be nice to have a trend. Same kind of thing. You, in your cooking, I am sure that you don't, the different harvests of fruits and vegetables that you get, you'll alter the amount of things you're going to use. I'm sure. It's all in the whole process. And while things, when we taste them separate, you never know what the synergy is going to be in the process of blending. You're always kind of surprised. You think we're going to go one direction, and we're all going off in another direction. So it's definitely a dynamic environment. Some barrels go through ML. We look at more, and we'll vary that each year depending on how it was last year. Majority of the time, we'll look at more of like maybe a 2/3, 1/3. So 2/3 non-ML, 1/3 ML. But then if we find we really like the ML barrels off that property, we'll start to switch that and maybe make it a 50-50 to play with that. Or if we don't like it as much, then we'll move it the other direction. It's always just this slow, tighter back and forth to figure out exactly where we're going to go.
So in that process of the barrels, do we inoculate some to go through ML?
We do.
Okay, we do.
We do. We specifically inoculate with an ML bug to be able to take that through, and some go all the way through, and we're really trying to not catch it where it tastes like it's butterscotch and sour cream. We really want to make it where it moves into more like a lemon yogurt kind of characteristics, and then creates this nice creaminess and richness on the palate. But that's, you never know. Each barrel is an individual fermentation, which makes it fun. It's more stuff to play with.
Roughly speaking, half the barrels are inoculated with malolactic bacteria and half of them aren't, roughly. And then once we go to blend, we figure out which ones are going to go where. Historically, we would do some ML tanks of Chardonnay and conceivably of Pinot Noir, but more of Chardonnay. Also, I would just say that as we would put our blends together, rarely did we like the ML Chardonnay tank or two that we had produced more than the Chardonnay barrels. And so at some point we also thought that we were just, I don't want to say it was an exercise in futility, but to go through the effort to prepare those wines that then require more cleanup work afterwards. If you're not really going to end up eating, it's like, so we just and we've obviously increased the number of barrels, but we haven't really increased the percentage of barrel fermentation in our overall program for quite a few years. I mean, I think for as long as Sean's been here, it's been in that 25% range. The very first Schram, the first vintages of Schram wouldn't have had quite as much barrel fermentation as they now have either. And for that matter, back in the 80s, we weren't doing that much barrel fermentation at all in, say, the Blanc or Blanc Noir. So it's changed a bit since then, but that was also 30 years ago.
Yeah. So there's not a question about this, but I know our base wines, 6 months, about 5-6 months before we go into garage, right?
Close, yeah. Schram, and
If you look- If you look at this one, we bottled it in April.
In April.
Yep, so harvest was August to September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, 7 months.
Has there been thoughts of maybe keeping the base wine longer?
We do that in the way of, we do set aside a portion of the blends to do that. But the way to be really clean, majority of that wine needs to all go into the bottle based upon our fiscal year and how our financials work. But we do keep a portion of that to see how that ages outside of there. And if we put it into a tank, then I have to figure out what to do with that tank, when that tank really should have the next vintage of wine in it, which means it's got to go into barrels or go off-site. And then once it's off-site, it's better to have it under our control than to give it to other people.
In theory, we could do a small lot like that, but from a practical standpoint, we're gonna have to fill up that winery again, starting in August of this year. So with all the tanks and barrels, right? So they better be empty or whatever you're gonna put in the wine. And so we've also hauled out some caves in the meantime. So it's a match. It's a match, and it's time to bottle. But it's an interesting concept, I guess. We'll never say never, but it would be interesting to age a wine in barrel for 2 years, then bottle it and see what kind of interesting layers of oxidation, might develop, but we have not done that.
How long does the blend, the final blend, spends together before going to bottle?
Ideally, right now, the ideal is to try and get it to spend a month
Okay.
blended together. If we can do that, that's kind of the goal. So it can marry before it goes in.
Relative to where we were in the past, we used to start bottling even in December, and we might be done by February. And at some stage, we elected to push that back as far towards the end of June as we could. Granted, we're making a little bit more, so that pushed it back, but we really don't start bottling until April. And that gives us more time for the wine to spend time in contact with the yeast leaves and barrels, and more time for settling. It's eliminated some filtrations. If you want to bottle really early, you gotta get that stuff cleaned up really fast, and so you lose the opportunity for natural settling. What the critics are going to ultimately determine with regards to the 2015 Napa Cabernet, the critics always have an opinion about Napa Cabernet as far as the vintage is concerned, maybe more so about vintage relative to Napa Cabernet than relative to any other California wine style. It seems like our entire state's vintage frame of reference gets determined based on what the critics say about Napa Cabernet in that vintage. But what we do know is that the yields were low, that the harvest was early, and with that we're seeing some nice density of flavor. It's not the kind that comes with a really super long hang time and a season that endures, but more the one that comes from a concentration of flavors in a relatively small amount of crop. So fun to taste our first two 2015 Cabernets here. Sean, tell us a little bit about this 15 Napa and the components that maybe comprise it.
So, smelling this wine, you can smell that you're getting the range of Cabernet out of Napa. So you're getting some of the more opulent you get out of the floor, the valley floor, and you're getting just a touch of a little bit of the Indian spice, a little bit of herbal in the back note, which is coming out of Howell Mountain. And then we have the Malbec that's sort of smoothing out that center. The Malbec came off of this property. We used less wine off of this property. We focused much more on JD, Jamie, and J. Davies. So we relied a little more heavily on Rutherford and Calistoga, and then we had a little bit of Coombsville that entered in this particular thing. It's about a barrel's worth. I think it's about 12%, maybe 13% of the blend. And you can see we also, in this particular vintage, we reduced the new barrel percentage. This particular vintage just needed a lighter touch in the way of that. You already had some resolution already coming in with the tannins, so the barrels were not there as much to sort of round out some of the flavors, sort of smooth things, and just sort of give that little support of the vanilla and the little bit of spice that you get out of the barrels. And then I think the Coopers we picked.
It says Vicar Terenceau Atelier.
So Atelier is a barrel, it's a Cooper that we've gone to and we're actually keep increasing. That is definitely one that it works definitely to smooth out the wine. It's very supportive of the wine. The Terenceau is a little bit more masculine, so it adds a little bit of that striking thing. Same thing with the Vicard. The Vicard can add a little bit more of the bacony smoke that people sort of like. But the Atelier has this nice vanilla, smooth, and it's very light touch in the way of the toast in there. So it's just a great all-around barrel. We use it both for Pinot and for Cabernet.
So Sean, a little bit of Red Cap incorporated, certainly our own property here, a little bit of the Rutherford Round Pond
as
as
well.
Winfield, a little Calistoga as well.
And a little bit of Simpkins. So the Simpkins came in, it's a little touch in the back. It's got a lot of black fruit. The harder point about pushing it that particular year is it has a little more greener notes. So we can use a little bit as a background note and then So it worked great in that particular capacity. We've continued with Simpkins. We're looking forward to making a 16 Simpkins. It won't be very large, but it'll be something I think is going to be a great addition to our vineyard estimate portfolio.
And the Simpkins is a Coombsville vineyard.
You can taste that we're now gone more towards a single vineyard. We're getting something that's much more even across the way. We have a little Petit Verdot to create some interest in the background, but it is not presenting itself as, we don't really have those herbal touches like we would get, like looking at the other parts of the Napa Valley. This also has more of a masculine type barrel profile, a little bit stronger. The Saint Martin, the Terranceau, the Car, they're all more of a masculine style barrel. We're using a little less Taillier in here to round some of those things out, but the tannins still have great integration. Even with our Diamond Mountain fruit, we're trying to retain that even in a year where we don't have a lot of barrels. And our total production was 1,200, so total production was 1,900 cases, whereas the production in 2014 was closer to 4,000 cases off this site. So we definitely picked in big. So the O2 would be represented in this particular blend. So we're not ripping out the vineyards just because we want to rip out the vineyards. We're ripping out the vineyards because we're trying to go in the pursuit of quality. And the best way for us to really try and up the game here is to try and make sure that we sort through the vineyards that we have, the sections we have on this estate, and try and figure out what's not been working, and that hasn't been working for a bit. So we really need to look at changing that and really upping the game, because it's one of the best spots on the entire site to be able to get fruit from. We really want to keep that and retain that for the JDE.
Again, thinking to what formerly was the O2 block at the very top of the property, getting up all the way up to about 1,000 feet elevation.
And so the Petit Verdot and the Malbec would have come out of a little bit out of the O2 block, but the majority is right down there in Jack's block, which is just the one that's off to the northwest corner of where we are in the Picnic Grove.
The level of detail, back to, we talked about it with the sparkling, some 300 base wine lots. That's a lot of lots. If we're only going to be making 12 wines, why would you bother? Back to the J. Davies site, heck, there might be 41 acres of planted vineyard that we're working with, but 35 picks or something like that, and so that's taking that other notion to even a more extreme level with these really tiny individual batches. Eventually they get into barrels, and so then we have all these 60-gallon barrels to work with. They don't all have to go in the blend, and so as you get the chance to produce the Jamie, it might only be 11 barrels. That's it. Out of we'll just throw a number of 200 or some barrels that we may have produced. But even as we get to the JD level, the notion is not every barrel that we produce has to go in, and there may be ways of I don't want to simplify too much, but cutting and pasting that kind of form it in such a way that the individual parts might have been a little rougher, but as a composite whole, look what we came up with.